Hello, everybody, and welcome back. In the last episode, we implemented the Recycler View adapter um, class, and we created our soccer tile adapter, and we actually got everything on screen showing a list of these objects here. But now we're going to actually hook into the second, or I guess the navigation part of this tutorial, and we're going to hook into the button click for to kind of fuel that. So uh, we're going to create another activity here. Let's call this soccer tile detail activity. I'm going to extend our app compat activity, and then we will create a new layout file, activity underscore soccer tile detail. So hopefully you can kind of see how main activity maps to activity underscore main, soccer tile detail activity maps to activity underscore soccer tile soccer tile detail. It's not like a must, but it is just like a convenient way to like a convenient naming convention to follow. So I would suggest doing that. And then inside here, we're actually going to have something that looks very, very similar to this, except with maybe a little bit more, information here. Well, we don't need the button, but we'll at least copy the beginning part of it. And let's see how that looks once we add some stuff in here. Yeah, so a little funky. What's going on here? There we go. Okay, so you can see we kind of have a pretty similar looking thing here. Let's maybe like modify this a tiny bit. I'm trying to think how. All right, I got an idea. I'm gonna remove the margin start and the margin top, and instead we're gonna do just general padding. Let's do 8 dp. It doesn't look bad. And then we're actually going to set the width to be match parent. We're going to set the let's see, the background to color black, but I'm just going to call this black background, and instead of Fs, we'll go with like 4s. That'll actually just modify the alpha value. Again, we went over this resource file, the colors file, in a previous video. I'll link it on screen now. But you can check that out if you're a little confused. Otherwise, we're just going to create a background color that yeah, sure, maybe we can go a little bit darker. That's what I'm thinking, and then we can change the text. Yeah, I guess so. That kind of works. Okay, then we have our description text view, which will just sit kind of right there, and then we will have our description long text view, which is going to be start to start of description text view, top to bottom of description text view, and then let's put, do we have margin top already? Yeah, let's put this at like 24 dp, so it'll kind of be a little different. And then for this one, we will do text style italic, so it'll kind of just be a little different. Let's set this start to start of parent, and then margin start. Yeah, because we made this view the entire width of the screen, it kind of threw off some of our constraints and whatnot, but we we got there. So long description about the club, blah blah blah. Okay, so this is a pretty basic UI here, but it kind of builds off of this previous idea here and just kind of brings it to life a little bit in more of like a detailed view, where you can imagine this having a lot more information there. So in our soccer tile detail activity, we will override the onCreate function, and we will call set content view with r.layout activity soccer tile detail, and then let's connect the other side of things, right? So inside, I'm gonna close a couple of these. We don't need that. We don't need that. Probably don't need that. Okay, so inside our view holder, we have here the onBind, the set onClick listener. Essentially, at this point, we want to navigate the user to the second screen. And while we could get the context here from the view, this button itself, it's kind of best practices to bubble this up, if you will. If you could imagine the activity container, or the activity scope containing the adapter, and then inside of the adapter, it also has a view holder. You kind of are a few layers deep in that hierarchy, and you would kind of like to bubble up any of these clicks that don't impact this view holder itself. For instance, if we had let's just rerun it. If we had a view holder that instead of clicking that button, we maybe like expanded the card or something like that, or collapsed the card, or changed something on this card, or if there was like a little favorites icon, you click it, you could modify it there, no problem. And you can kind of run that within the scope of this view holder. But because it's a greater task at hand, right, we're going to actually have this little view here control the fact that this entire activity is going to be moving to the next one. We want to bubble that up to our to the correct location, and in this case it's going to actually be the activity class, because then it's just easier to make the transition from there. So another fun or simpler way of doing something that Kotlin added over Java, you can actually basically pass in a function to be called. I think this actually has been implemented in some of the later versions of Java, but I kind of walked away from it a bunch of years ago, so when I left it, it didn't have something like this, but I think it does now, so maybe I'm a little outdated. But anyway, this will be the, let's say, I don't know, the learn more button. Well, let's see, we might actually do a bunch. So let's actually create an interface here, and we'll just call this the soccer tile interface. And then within here, we will do function on, not on bind, on learn more. Button clicked, and we will pass in the position. And then here we will actually we'll get an instance of that interface. Good. So what I was going to show you is that you can basically also just pass in a function. So let me just do it real quick. Let's call this just callback. This denotes type again. So then if you put in this as the type, this essentially means that this is a function call that accepts no parameters and returns nothing. Let's say you wanted to, for whatever reason, in this case we're passing back an int, So you could also define it like that. And then let's say you wanted a Boolean back, you could do that as well. And then in code here, you can say, you know, call or successful, a variable here equals our callback with the adapter position, right? And so nothing's freaking out here, and that's because callback is defined, as you can see here, as a function that accepts an integer and returns a Boolean. You know, you could do integer string, you know, and then now it's like you're missing an argument, you know, kind of thing. So you can kind of get away with it in some ways, you know, if you just have one quick little thing you got to do instead of building a whole interface, you know, you can go ahead and just utilize that. But we're actually going to build an interface just because I think we're going to want to do a couple other things. I'm actually just going to rip this out and build a new class real quick. Okay. Okay. So then in this case, we are just going to say oh, sorry, we don't have that. We will actually need to pass in the soccer tile interface to this onBind function so that we have it. And so here we can just bubble this down to the soccer tile interface that we have in the constructor. And then soccer tile interface, on learn more button clicked, add adapter position, right? So now this is going to notify our interface that's provided in the constructor, which is going to exist in the main activity. And in this case, instead of passing in like an inline object that is the interface, we're just going to go ahead and define this and then have our activity actually implement that interface. So extending, I guess a little bit more Kotlin syntax, when extending a particular class, you denote it this way. And then anything else, you know, traditionally in Java, you would have implements as a keyword, and that doesn't exist in this case. So instead, you can kind of just separate things from a comma. So if you had another interface, you can literally just do comma and then, you know, the other interface. Or, you know, I guess we could just even do view dot on click listener, and that's another interface that we need to implement. So blah blah blah. So a little Kotlin syntax for you there. So you can either start typing if you know the name of the function, and it'll kind of come up as what you need to implement, or you can do Control I, and that'll bring up a little window that has you implement members. And the same thing, Control O is actually for override. So you can see all the different functions that exist here that are just, there's so many, that you have the capability to override because you are the app compat activity extension. So anyway, now at this point, let's set this to be a global variable because okay, so that's interesting, but it goes away. Okay, that's kind of a Kotlin thing. You saw here, it says platform declaration clash, and so basically because this is a variable called soccer tile list, Kotlin oftentimes for variables will actually under the hood create the get and set function for you. And so that's how when you end up saying, you know, when you just reference, you know, dot button text. It's under the hood. It's really calling .get button text, and there's a field in this class named button text, and so under the hood it's actually creating all that stuff for you. So it's complaining here saying that because you've named it this way and because you've named this function this way, we're having an issue with this stuff. But if you were to either rename that to a different function, or in this case, if you were to just make the variable private, it won't create those getters and setters because an external class should not have access to it because it's private. So you can kind of get around it that way. So, and now at this point we have, when this code runs, that means that someone has clicked a particular button at this particular position in the list. And because we have things that are just going to match up, one to one, like this is index 0, this is index 1, we actually have the position be able to just match up directly to whatever the soccer tile list position is, and you'll be at the appropriate data for that view. So we will make use of that soon, but in the meantime we will actually just start our activity. Again, we covered this in a previous video, but it's pretty straightforward. You just need a context and then the destination that you want to move to. And again, covered in a previous video, we need to add this activity to our manifest. Otherwise, when we were to run this, this would actually just go ahead and crash. And so now if we run the application, we should move somewhere when the user clicks a button. Yeah, and you could see our UI here is laid out appropriately. This is where the image view is, this is where that text view is with that background, and then the other stuff, the description and long description exist underneath here, but we don't have any data there. We don't have anything running. So also you notice that there's really like no good way to go back. There's no back button. This is an emulator that has the gesture navigation on, so I actually have to swipe from the edge of the screen here as opposed to like clicking a little back button that exists here. But we can change that here. We can actually kind of do something with this toolbar. So without getting into too much detail here, because of the way our theme is set up, we actually have access to this toolbar here, which you notice isn't even a part of our layout or anything like that. The system just inflates it for you. And to get a reference to it at the activity level, you just call support action bar. Now you notice here it actually is nullable here. And so in order to operate on it, we need to call $dot, and then you can do something to it. So we're going to say, forget which one it is, set display home as up enabled. I think that's what it is. And so if we were to rerun this real quick, yeah. So now you can see that there's actually this little back arrow here. However, there's nothing that's happening when we're clicking it. So we will actually override something at the activity level to intercept this callback of the user clicking something. So I'm going to go ahead and do this, and then we shall talk about it. Okay, so on options item selected is the actual function that you need to override for this, I believe. Yeah, so there's another function here called on create options menu, and we'll get into that in a little bit, but that basically allows you to kind of customize some of the stuff that appears in this toolbar. So if you've ever seen those like 3 vertical dots or maybe a save icon or a trash can or something like that, that's coming from this particular functionality here, where you can actually override this function, pass in a particular menu that you've defined in XML, and then it'll be inflated there. but then the other half of that is it's only being inflated and shown here, but then on option item selected is when you can actually interact with some of that, some of the clicks that the user has done with those items there. So in this case, we only care about this back button, and it actually has a special ID. So the android.r.id.home is this back button here, and is only that back button. So it's just kind of a nifty way to, or it's like it's a system option here, if you will, and you just need to hook into it. Again, you just need to evaluate this particular item that gets clicked, its ID. When it equals that, we're going to call finish, which basically just destroys the current activity that you're on. And so therefore it'll simulate going backwards on the stack. And you can see that happening right there. So, right here we have at stack position 0, this particular activity, which is called main activity. Once we start a new activity, we add it on top of the stack, and then finish basically removes it from the stack, destroys everything, and all of the resources that the activity is using are now being released to the system, and so you'll kind of clean things up at that point. So we don't care for, the only thing that we have in the toolbar is this particular home button, and so otherwise you just kind of call else super, and then here we're returning true because that means that this particular activity, are consuming this event, and so it will not be passed down here. Otherwise, if you end up calling super, it'll go down into the appcompat activity class, and then it'll try to run some logic there to figure out what to do, and if not, it'll just keep bubbling up the chain. So because we return true here, we're notifying the system that yes, we are actually intercepting this callback, and so the system has nothing further to do. So that's why we have to call finish. If we just commented that out really quickly, nothing is actually happening. So we're intercepting the click and nothing happens. But once we have finished there, you saw it before, we actually terminated the activity. So all is good. We have a little bit of a scaffold in place here where we're going to navigate basically this Manchester United or this Manchester City or Arsenal, whichever tile we click on. We're going to go to this next screen, and we will do a little bit of work here in the next video. So I will see you there.